I could taste the bitterness in my wine as I sat in the dimly lighted corner of our opulent dining room. The pricey crimson flowed in my glass, but it did nothing to calm the growing tempest inside me. I was supposed to be in the kitchen, assisting with dinner as a servant, but instead I was listening to a conversation that made my fury boil. From the other room, I could hear my mother-in-law, Beverly, chuckling in that annoying manner she has. The sound was harsh and irritating, but what concerned me the most was not the laugh, but what she was saying. We'll invite her to Jordan's birthday dinner at Le Sauvage, and when the bill arrives, we'll all act surprised that we're expected to pay for our meals. She'll be mortified when she can't afford it, Beverly remarked, her voice dripping with smug glee. Her daughter, my sister-in-law Maddie, laughed and said, "She'll probably try to pay with tips from that little cafe she works at, can you imagine?" The bitterness in my chest intensified. They felt they were so brilliant for planning to humiliate me at Jordan's birthday dinner. They assumed I was simply the waitress who married their wealthy son. To them, I was just a low-class outsider who didn't deserve to sit at their beautiful table. What they didn't realize was that I was more than just a waitress. I had established an empire from the ground up, the fancy automobiles in our driveway, the lovely home we lived in, and the trips to elite destinations were all thanks to me, not Jordan. They simply couldn't see beyond their own narrow perspective of the world. As Beverly continued to chuckle, Maddie interjected again, "She's probably too sensitive about money anyway. It's not like she could even afford to eat at a restaurant like that." I had to strive to keep my expression normal as my grasp on the wine glass tightened. They assumed I didn't know how to cook, entertain, or fit in with their high society lifestyle. They couldn't understand that Le Sauvage, the posh restaurant where they intended to humiliate me, was one of the crown jewels of my restaurant empire. To be more specific, this is my brand's flagship. They were unaware that I had spent years developing an outstanding reputation in this location. They believed they could make me feel tiny, embarrass me in front of their buddies, and knock me down a peg. What they didn't realize was that I was quietly accumulating my own successes, brick by brick, while they mocked me. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Jordan's voice carried through the door. It was filled with doubt, as he was always eager to please his overbearing mother. "Oh, Jordan, don't be ridiculous," Beverly said. "Mia's working at that diner again. She's lucky we even let her in this family." I could hear her eye roll from here. "You could have done better, you know." Better, I thought. I had done much better. I had created something of value that they could never take away from me. Nevertheless, Jordan, my husband, lacked the courage to defend me. I checked my phone as another communication from my executive team arrived. The notice stated that the merging of our most recent acquisition had been completed. Another 50 venues were added to the portfolio. Your net worth has grown by a few $1,000,000. My heart raced in my chest. But I couldn't tell my in-laws that. They'd never know. Not until the moment was right. Beverly's words interrupted my thoughts. "Mia, the dinner isn't going to prepare itself. Get in here and help," she said, her tone oozing with irritation. I slid my phone into my pocket and continued cooking the supper. As I plated the food, I reflected on everything that had led up to this moment. 5 years of subtle insults, 5 years of enduring their mocking, 5 years of playing the humble, unassuming wife while secretly expanding a restaurant empire across 3 continents. And in those 5 years, I had never allowed them to see the reality. I came into the dining room with the perfectly plated food, my heart pumping with anticipation and rage. Beverly quickly sniffed the air, her nose wrinkling in that familiar, condescending manner. "Really, Mia? You couldn't have at least made something that resembles proper cooking?" she questioned, eyeing the dish with a critical eye. I smiled tightly as I watched them eat the food I had meticulously prepared. They had no notion that these simple dishes cost hundreds of dollars each plate at my flagship restaurants. I had trained as a chef in Paris before deciding to launch my restaurant empire. They had no idea. As they ate, I casually commented, "I hope you're sure about the dinner next week at Le Sauvage. I know how exclusive the place is, and it can be rather expensive." Beverly waved me away, ignoring my worry. "Oh, don't worry about that. We'll pay for ourselves," she added, her voice full of phony friendliness. "You just worry about your own plate." I grinned and nodded, knowing that they had not only underestimated me, they had no idea who they were dealing with. I couldn't wait for them to realize the full extent of their mistake. Later that evening, while Jordan slept comfortably alongside me, I sat in my home office and made the call. I called Pierre, the executive chef of Le Sauvage. "Everything set for next week?" I said, my voice firm. "Oui, Madame Chen," Pierre responded, his French accent heavy. "The private room is reserved, and the special menu you created will be perfect, just as you requested." I smiled. The trap was laid. "Make sure that every item on the menu has the full price listed. I told you. I want there to be no confusion." Pierre paused. "Are you sure about this, madame?" I sat back in my chair and looked out the window at the metropolitan skyline. "Absolutely. I want them to know exactly what they're getting into." I hung up and opened my laptop to study the most recent financial data. Another restaurant business had just been bought, bringing dozens of new sites into my portfolio. My dominion was expanding faster than anyone had ever imagined, and they still assumed I was merely a waiter. I focused my attention on the recently received private investigator's report. Beverly's secret gambling habit had been revealed. I'd known for years, but now I had confirmation. Are Maddie's credit cards maxed out? I also had such details. Jordan's failing investment? They were also part of the record. I'd been discreetly bailing him out for years, covering up his shortcomings while he played the adoring husband, but none of this mattered anymore. Next week, at Jordan's birthday dinner, they'd discover what happens when you underestimate someone like me. I'd been patient. It was now time for the perfect opportunity to arise. They were about to discover who Mia Chen truly was. The week leading up to Jordan's birthday dinner felt like an eternity, with each day dragging as I patiently waited for the moment when everything would fall apart. My mind was continuously racing, going over every tiny detail. I went over the menu at Le Sauvage again, ensuring every pricing was plain and obvious. My executive team collaborated extensively with the restaurant personnel to ensure that the evening went just as planned. Beverly and Maddie believed they had the upper hand, but they could not have been more mistaken. Jordan was unconcerned, as usual. He spent his days worrying about his career and attempting to please his mother. The night before the dinner, he asked me in that calm, drowsy voice, "Are you sure you're okay with all of this?" I know my mom can be intense sometimes. I smiled softly and tried to sound encouraging. "Don't worry, I'm fine, honey. This will be a nice evening." It was obviously a falsehood, but I'd learned long ago that it was best to keep my ideas under wraps, allowing everyone to believe I was just the quiet, submissive wife. Allow them to assume I was the naive one. Allow them to assume I was the type of woman who would be ashamed or intimidated by a fine restaurant's prices. In actuality, I had spent years creating something beyond their comprehension. They had no idea that the chain of high-end restaurants I operated spanned numerous continents and generated millions in income. They had no idea that I had been gathering every insult, every sarcastic remark, and every time they belittled me. It wasn't out of weakness or insecurity. No, I kept a record so that when the time came, I could use it against them. Jordan remained oblivious while I stood in front of the mirror, altering my clothing. It was simple and stylish, with the label hidden from view. I wanted them to see what they expected, a modest, low-class woman who married above her station. But the truth was, the dress I wore was more valuable than Beverly's entire wardrobe. And what about my purse? A one-of-a-kind designer piece worth more than Maddie's automobile. I wasn't attempting to impress them. I was simply demonstrating that I could play their game better than they ever could. I witnessed Beverly and Maddie come early for the meal via security cameras. They were virtually humming with excitement, planning ways to disgrace me. They assumed I was unaware that they had bribed the maitre d' to play along with their terrible joke. What they didn't comprehend was that the maitre d' had worked with me for almost a decade and was well-versed in the evening's true entertainment. "Here they come, Madame Chen," wrote Jean-Luc, the maitre d'. "Your mother-in-law tried to slip me $100 to help with the humiliation. I added it to the evidence folder." I couldn't help smiling. They were making it far too easy. When I finally arrived, Jordan stood uneasily by my side. "You look beautiful." he remarked, his voice uncertain, yet oblivious of what was about to happen. "Thank you, darling," I responded. "Let's go enjoy the evening, shall we?" As we entered Le Sauvage, I couldn't help but feel a sense of empowerment. The private dining area was precisely what I had envisioned, elegant, scary, and outfitted with hidden cameras to record every second of the evening. Beverly and Maddie were already seated, their smug smiles hardly hidden. They were nearly oozing with self-satisfaction, waiting for the time when I would be forced to admit my alleged inferiority. I could almost hear Beverly's voice in my mind. "Don't worry, dear. We'll take care of ourselves." Yes, they were prepared to watch me squirm, but I had different plans. Beverly inquired, her voice oozing with fake concern. "How is everything, Mia?" "We know it's a bit of a stretch for you, but I hope you're comfortable." I smiled softly. "It's lovely, very elegant." Beverly and Maddie exchanged glances, and I knew they were ready to purchase the most expensive items on the menu, exactly as I predicted. The thick, leather-bound menus appeared, each embossed with gold lettering. They cautiously opened them, carefully reading the pricing and peering at me from the corner of their eyes. They assumed the charges would scare me and make me too embarrassed to speak. "Order anything you like, Mia," Beverly remarked, her voice excessively pleasant. "It's a special occasion." I pretended disbelief as I examined the costs. "Oh my, these prices are quite high," I said. Maddie's arrogant smile widened. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of place. Don't worry, we've got this." I played along, claiming to be overwhelmed by the elaborate menu, but internally, I felt calm. Every detail of this was going precisely as I had planned. When the server suggested wine pairings, Beverly's eyes lit up. "Of course," she replied. "We'll have a wine pairing menu for everyone," I observed as they ordered the most expensive dishes, including vitamins and extras. They were racking up the bill to ridiculous proportions, just as I had intended. Every gaze they cast my way was fraught with malicious anticipation. They assumed I'd be humiliated by the total. I was ready. They would soon discover who they had been dealing with all along. The moment was approaching. As the courses began to arrive, each more lavish than the last, I watched them eat without hesitation. Beverly and Maddie dived into their lunches with delighted anticipation, making sarcastic remarks under their breath, well aware that I was probably humiliated by the exorbitant rates. Jordan sat silently next to me, his eyes fixed on his plate, attempting to ignore the tension in the air. He did not understand. He never did. Maddie leaned toward me, her tone condescending. "You must be so proud of your little diner, Mia. It must be such a step up from that. Well, what do you call it again? A real restaurant?" I maintained my smile, unwilling to take the bait. "Oh, you know," I said, casually tapping my fingers across the edge of my wine glass. "It's a family business. We try to keep it small and intimate." The sarcasm in my voice was so faint that I hardly noticed it, but I could see the look of uncertainty in their eyes as they struggled to make sense of what I had just said. They had no idea how large my empire had become, or how much money my restaurants were making each year. No, they saw me as a lowly waitress who had married their beloved Jordan. But their mistake wasn't only underestimating me, it was believing that I would allow them get away with their cruelty. Jean-Luc appeared with the second entree, an exquisite foie gras served with a rare vintage wine. The sight of it appeared to give Beverly and Maddie a sense of vengeful satisfaction, as if they had already won. They picked at their food, exchanging pointed glances, knowing that the humiliation would soon occur. Then the inevitable happened. The server approached the table, holding the leather folder that contained the check. I could hear the tiny rustle of paper as Jean-Luc placed it in front of them, and I could almost feel the anticipation rising in the air. Beverly's eyes brightened up, anxious for the event to begin. She reached for the folder, her fingers quivering with unbridled delight. I let her do the first check, seeing the blood drain from her face as she scanned the results. Her eyes widened. "This can't be right," she muttered, her voice rising in surprise. "There's been some mistake." I tilted my head slightly, lowering my voice to a mild, almost innocent tone. "Is everything all right, Beverly?" Her hands shook as she flipped through the check, and her face became paler by the second. "This is impossible! How could it be so much? Richard, do something!" she yelled at her son. Jordan was searching through his wallet, his cheeks flushed with shame. I don't have enough," he said, barely above a whisper. I could feel Maddie's unease as she examined her own check, her gaze bouncing between the bill and myself. The bill was intended to hit them all at once, precisely as I had planned. They couldn't hide or escape their amazement. I smiled while watching them scramble. "What's the matter, Beverly?" I inquired, barely containing my amusement. "Is something wrong?" The tension in the room was apparent. Beverly's eyes darted nervously toward the waitstaff, and her fingers clutched the bill like a lifeline. I think there's been an error. Richard, you have to fix this." I did not wait. I slowly rose from my seat and moved to the wine vault. "No need to worry about it, Beverly, I'll take care of it." I entered the code, and the glass door of the vault swung open. I took out my phone, which had already started vibrating with texts from my executive team. I watched the room through the inconspicuous cameras I'd set up, documenting every second of their humiliation in crystal clear detail. Jean-Luc, the consummate professional, approached with a modest smile. "Would you like to take care of the bill now, Madame Chen?" I nodded, keeping my voice cool and steady. "Yes, please add their bills to my account." He did not hesitate. "Of course, Madame Chen." As I returned to the table, I could see Beverly's uncertainty and gradual comprehension. Her smugness vanished, replaced by disbelief. "What do you mean, add it to your account?" she exclaimed. This is ridiculous." I kept calm, as if we were talking about nothing more than the weather. "I own this restaurant, Beverly. In fact, I own all of them." I took the CEO badge from my handbag and placed it on the table, watching as her gaze fixed on the logo. "I suppose I should properly introduce myself. Mia Chen, CEO and owner of the Le Sauvage chain and several other high-end restaurants worldwide." The silence was terrible. Beverly's mouth hung open, trying to grasp what I had just spoken. Maddie blinked, as if she had seen a ghost. And Jordan? He just stared at me, his visage motionless and pale, as if he had witnessed the entire world collapsing in front of him. I continued, "I also own that little diner you love to mock. It grossed $10 million last year. You can check the records if you like." Beverly's gaze shifted between the CEO badge, the bill, and the startled looks on her son and niece's faces. It took her a few moments to regain her voice. "But you can't be... I thought you were just a waitress." I smiled. "No, Beverly, I've always been much more than that." I picked up my wine glass and savored the moment. "You see, I've been quietly building an empire all these years, and while you've been busy mocking me and looking down on me, I've been collecting every insult, every sneer, and every cruel joke you've made at my expense." Maddie opened her lips to complain, but no words came. I tapped a button on my phone, and the concealed screens in the room came to life. "Perhaps you'd like to see the evidence?" I inquired, seeing their faces shift from astonishment to fear as the screens flashed financial documents, property deeds, and bank statements. The room seemed impossibly still. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could hear the faint hum of the hidden cameras, which captured every fleeting instant of recognition. Beverly's face was now ashen, her mouth moving silently as she attempted to absorb what had just occurred. Maddie, who had been cocky and self-assured just seconds before, now looked like a deer caught in headlights. She couldn't conceal her uncertainty in her gaze. I leaned back in my chair, my voice measured and almost too quiet. "You've spent years looking down on me, haven't you? Calling me the waitress, the girl who doesn't belong. All the while, I've been quietly building an empire, one you never bothered to see." I grabbed for my handbag again, pulling out the folder I had packed specifically for this occasion. "But you'll understand now, won't you? You'll finally see exactly who you've been mocking all these years." I slid the folder over the table, making sure it landed in front of Beverly. 5 years of insults, 5 years of underestimating me, all neatly documented, I saw her shiver slightly as she opened the folder open, her eyes searching the pages. Every nasty remark, every snide statement they made me feel inferior. Everything was there. My precise records describe each event, slight and humiliation. She turned over the pages swiftly, her gaze widening with each line. Maddie looked at her aunt and then at the documents, but she did not dare to speak. Beverly's hands shook as she reached the final page, an email thread between herself and Emma, in which they openly discussed their plans to embarrass me during the dinner. "All of it," I replied softly, "preserved for moments like this." Beverly looked up, her expression filled with shock, betrayal, and, dare I say it, fear. You planned this? You set this all up?" I smiled, a hint of satisfaction coming into my voice. "No, Beverly, you planned it. You set the stage, and all I did was let you play your part." I glanced at Jean-Luc, who was standing calmly to the side, waiting for more orders. "Make sure they all get copies of the report." He nodded and approached each of them, delivering the heavy papers. They started reading one by one. I watched them absorb the information, feeling the weight of my empire sink in as they examined the financials, properties, and restaurant locations. They were staring at the evidence of my accomplishment, which they could no longer ignore. "Everything you thought you knew about me," I said, my tone now dripping with cold delight, "was a lie. You've been living in your bubble, and I've been quietly, patiently, watching you all. And now, Beverly, now you see what happens when you underestimate someone." Her attention switched from the report to me, and for the first time, she had no response. No smug response or caustic remark, just silence. I wasn't finished yet. "Oh, and by the way," I said, moving forward slightly, "I've been paying off your debts. The gambling ones, Beverly, the ones you've been hiding from everyone, pretending that your family's wealth was still intact." I watched her wince, her complexion paler even more. "I bought all your debt last week. It's mine now." Maddie was also starting to realize what was going on. She'd been living in her own bubble of hubris, but it was about to burst. She raised her head from the report and caught my gaze, her eyes bouncing between me and the documents, disbelief written all over her face. You've been covering for us?" she asked, her voice quivering in surprise. "But we treated you like nothing." I nodded. "Yes, you did. And now, I'm going to make sure that you understand exactly how it feels." I focused my attention back on Jordan. His face was as white as a ghost, and his hands trembled slightly as he thumbed over the financial documents. He hadn't said anything since I introduced myself as CEO, but I knew the truth. He had never appreciated the magnitude of what I had accomplished. He'd always been satisfied to let his family run the show, dictating how our marriage should be. But now it was his chance to experience what it was like to be on the other end of my calm might. "Jordan," I murmured softly, my voice piercing through the thick tension in the room. "Do you remember when you told me I should focus on learning about the restaurant business? The one you said was a hobby of mine? Well, surprise. I've been doing more than just learning. I've been leading." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with both shame and perplexity. "Mia, I had no idea. I never thought—" I cut him off. "That's the problem, Jordan. You never bothered to ask. You were too busy letting your mother dictate our life, our marriage." I dug into my purse and pulled out another set of divorce papers. I've had enough of being underestimated. His eyes widened as he read through the divorce papers, and for the first time that night he spoke up, his voice cracking. "Mia, please, we can fix this. We can—" "No," I replied firmly. "We can't. It's over." I slid the papers over the table, allowing them to drop in front of him with a gentle thud. I could sense the weight of the moment hanging in the air, like a thick fog. For so long, I had been the one who suffered in silence, building my business from the bottom up while he and his family tormented me at every opportunity. Now it was my turn to take charge. I turned to Beverly one last time, my face calm and serene. "By the way, Beverly, I'm foreclosing on your house next week. Those gambling debts, you can't run from them forever." The expression on her face was priceless. Desperation, despair, and raw panic washed over her features as she looked between the documents, the divorce papers, and the reality of what was about to transpire. "Security," I answered quietly. "Please escort them out." Beverly opened her lips to complain, but no words came. The security personnel, who had been observing from the corner, moved forward to lead them out of the room. Beverly turned to face me one more time as they were led away. Her voice trembled. "How could you be so cruel, Mia?" I couldn't help but giggle quietly. "Cruel? No, Beverly. I learned from the best. You spent 5 years teaching me exactly how to serve revenge." I stopped, allowing the weight of my words to sink in. I just made sure to charge an appropriate price. With that, I returned to my wine, savoring the final taste. The silence in the room was sweeter than any victory I'd ever experienced. The following few months were a frenzy of change. Martha's gambling debts became public knowledge, and her once high social standing plummeted within days. People who had previously treated her like royalty were now avoiding her at all costs. The tabloids had a field day, and all the sordid details were out in the open: her hidden gambling habit, the falsehoods she'd told everyone about her family's fortune, and the devastation she'd caused in her personal life. Emma was not spared. The disclosure of her credit card debts was only the beginning. Her high society acquaintances turned against her after they discovered she had been maxing out credit cards, only to keep up appearances. Richard's fall from grace was almost as dramatic as his mother's. He spent weeks in denial, unwilling to admit that I was the one who genuinely kept our marriage together. When news spread that his success was largely due to my empire, his business reputation suffered. He tried dating younger women, but when they discovered he wasn't the affluent entrepreneur he seemed to be, they quickly lost interest. As for me, I saw it all happen from the calm confines of my office, surrounded by the bustle of my booming restaurant business. More transactions were completed, more sites opened, and my influence grew. Every time I saw a headline about my in-laws' demise, I couldn't help but smile. A year later, I got a letter from Martha. It seemed apologetic, regretful even. She admitted that she now understood what it was like to be looked down on and brutally condemned for circumstances beyond her control. I read the letter once before filing it away with the others, another piece of proof in my long-running revenge plot. I did not need to answer. The gratification I received was not from having the last word, but from letting them underestimate me and then revealing everything at the right time. Sometimes revenge does not have to be complicated. Sometimes it's as simple as letting individuals reveal you who they truly are and then making them suffer the consequences. Years had gone, but the aftermath of that night was still felt. My name became well known in business circles, not only for my restaurants, but also for how I managed my personal life. I wasn't some selfish individual seeking vengeance for the sake of it. No, I remained patient, strategic, and exact. I allowed everyone to underestimate me, and in doing so, I developed an empire. The story of how I brought down my in-laws, Martha, Emma, and Richard, was nearly legendary. Business conferences invited me to speak, but not on retribution. No, the discussions were about patience, preparation, and the importance of being underestimated. I was asked how it felt to have the tables turned in such dramatic fashion. I simply smiled and responded with a calmness that had taken years to develop. Success, I would remind them, is not about proving others wrong. It is about allowing them to be wrong. Then, when the time is right, you expose what they didn't expect. It was never my intention to show off my victory. It wasn't about me being the villain. It was about revealing the truth. They'd laughed at me, belittled me, and treated me as if I were nothing. They believed they could use their wealth and connections to humiliate me and make me feel tiny. What they didn't realize was that I had been quietly creating my own legacy, bigger, stronger, and more powerful than anything they could ever do. I received a communication from my executive team. Another restaurant group was interested in selling, and they offered a price that was difficult to refuse. I grinned at that thought. Expanding my empire was a matter of when, not if, and I was not going to stop anytime soon. Meanwhile, I heard whispers about my previous in-laws. Martha was working as a casino greeter, the same woman who used to look down on those who were struggling to make ends meet. Emma was attempting to sell real estate in a little town, her high society background a distant memory. And Richard? Well, he'd moved back in with his mother, his reputation in ruins. He wasn't the wealthy entrepreneur he had once claimed to be, and without my help, he was a shell of his former self. As for me, I was thriving. My restaurant business continued to expand, and I had no plans to slow down. Life was good. And in those quiet moments of introspection, when I thought about that night, how everything had come to a head, how I had disclosed my actual self to them, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. Martha, Emma, and Richard had each done their part. They believed they were humiliating me, but they had just laid the groundwork for their own collapse. Getting even was not the sweetest form of revenge. It was in revealing to them that the waitress they had so casually insulted had been the one holding all the cards all along. Sometimes revenge doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes it's simply waiting, being patient, and then watching everything unfold at the right time. And when did that moment arrive? I ensured that the price was exactly what it was worth.